Good evening. I'm Bruce Pillman, Vice President of Programs for the Rochester chapter of IS&T, and I'd like to welcome everybody in the room and online to our presentation from Dr. John McCarten.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the human vision system, self-driving cars, and the emergence of engineering cognitive psychology. My wife actually asked me to please insert the word cognitive. And if you go and you look up what cognitive means, it's relating to the process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and senses. And she is right. Again, as we like to say. So with AI and everything going on in the world, it's really interesting to see how engineering and psychology are actually merging together now, because we're trying to figure out, how do we handle data? How do we process data, and how do we use data? And I'm not a big stickler for terms. I'm more of a just get it done. But I will make the following comment. The two words floating around now, AI, is very general, and half the time I don't know what people are talking about. Same thing with the word memory. Because memory, are we talking about hardware? Are we talking about data? Are we talking about the instruction sets that we use? That's a totally different talk. But the word memory, and psychologists talk about procedural and implicit and explicit memory. And also lawyers talk about priming. It's very complicated because we're talking about a noun, a verb, an adjective, or an adverb. Right? I'm not a stickler, but those two words drive me nuts because I don't know what people are talking about half the time when they use those. All right, so moving on. Hello, computer. What's going on? Just so everybody is aware, in 2012, the deep Alex Krzyzewski and George Hinton at the University of Toronto won the ImageNet competition. And it was kind of AI's aha moment because they blew everybody away. And what's interesting is they only used two NVIDIA GeForce GPUs, which were used for gaming. And I will want to make one comment here, is they effectively inverted how graphic cards do calculations, because graphic cards are meant to display things. They rewrote how they used it and took the data and fed it back into the graphics card. It's an important point, which I'm going to get to later. All right. They did it at a cost of, the two cards were about $500 each. So the whole computer cost about $2,000. Along comes ChatGPT, which was released in 2018. That was trained with NVIDIA's DGX1 supercomputer, which cost $150,000 at the time that came out. And it turns out it was 25 times more energy efficient than those GPUs for doing those calculations, but there were a lot more, and they're doing a lot more calculations. It's effectively very sophisticated curve fitting is what they're doing. People get hung up on all large language models, but it's really just curve fitting. And then along comes today, we have the NVIDIA Blackwell servers. Those things are going for $3 million each. They're about 25 times more energy efficient than their supercomputer 7 years earlier. Now, what's interesting is NVIDIA is selling about 1,000 of these a week now. That's $3 billion, and those are about 60 to 80% profit margin. So we are in the wrong business, by the way, because that's like $1.5 to $2 billion a week in profit that they're making currently. And there's like 1,400 of these data centers getting built in the US right now. Question is, are those going to be paperweights in about 5-6 years? Because you see how the energy efficiency is going, about every 5 years, you're not going to want to use one of those if you can use something else. And along those lines comes Google, and they have their new Trillium, they have a TPU V6, which is a tensor processing unit, which is designed for doing a lot of the calculations they need to do with Gemini or Chat, their version of ChatGPT. And it's supposedly about 2 to 4x more energy efficient than the Blackwell. So already the Blackwell is starting to become obsolete. And it does beg some questions about where we're even going with all this. You think about it. Now, I've been thinking about this a little bit, and all this is the cloud. But there's a lot of companies out there currently working on application-specific integrated circuits. because those graphics cards and NVIDIA are basically very good at doing matrix calculations. But a lot of the stuff, the way the brain works, isn't just simple matrix calculations. And I'm not going to talk about data structures and everything. And I don't know how many of you know about Zipf's law of language and all that. But it's pretty clear the way that the brain organizes its data is fractally. And it's a fractal hierarchy. And it's the way that you can think of uh, cities and road networks or rivers and lakes. That's how things are structured. I don't know how this is all going to get implemented. Thanks. I do think I'm going to just give you some advice. I just put some money into Sony. I think of all the application-specific integrated circuit companies out there, Sony's actually in the best position because they have image sensors, they're doing self-driving cars, they have their gaming stuff, and they can hybrid all that together and win. We'll see. But this does beg a question, cloud AI versus edge AI. I believe about 80% of the money will end up in edge. Right now, almost all the money is going to the cloud. We'll see. You know, who knows? It's the fog of investing, right? We don't know where the world's going. So it's an interesting comment. I want to make a comment about this. When I was in high school, I was taking Western civilization, there were like 3 chapters on the Enlightenment. And there was one paragraph about this guy named Francis Bacon. He was a natural philosopher that helped develop the scientific method and believed that it was most useful if you can take knowledge and you implement it. And he kind of came a little bit of an idol to me. I don't know, but it's somebody I like to quote, you know, because you can know anything, but if you can't use it, who cares to some extent? And as an example of that, I'm going to make a side comment here that in 1970, there were roughly about 5 deaths for every 1 billion passenger air miles traveled. And I remember this as a kid, is people would say, you know, like air crashes would happen in 3s, like over a period of a couple months, they'd be in groups of 3, such. By 2019, that number had dropped to 0.05 deaths. That's a remarkable about 100x improvement. There's some questions about the number, how you get to this. I'm going to trust this blogger called Javier. All right. Furthermore, in constant dollars, the cost of air travel has decreased about 10x, if inflation adjusted. So this is my favorite example of power of incremental improvements. You can see the same thing in image data. If you look at what images looked like in the 1970s compared to now, they're orders of magnitude better. You know, and it was slowly incremental improvements every few years. It got a little bit better. You can even see it on the iPhone screens. And the engineers that made this happen, in my opinion, should be considered heroes. And we believe self-driving car systems will incrementally improve. It'll be interesting to see where these systems evolve over 50 years. Right? And I think Francis Bacon would kind of be proud to see this curve of the number of deaths going down. It's the way that things should be. We'll get there. We do manage to get there. Now, if you look, this is one of the many self-driving systems that's currently under development. This is the Sony Honda. This is a picture from 2013. The car they're working on actually has 45 sensors on it. And if you come in here, the red visible ones are actually used for the self-driving car system. The green ones on there are actually for projection, rear looking to go to the screen for the driver. So those don't really count for the self-driving car system. The 3 blue ones are visible. They're to be looking if the driver is awake in the passenger. So those 3 really don't count. And then there's the LiDAR one, which is the brown one in the middle there. And I don't know how much you guys know about LiDAR, but basically it's a scanning laser and you map out a 3D scene and it's used to see far out. They usually do it at 905 nanometers or 1,550 nanometers. And that's for scanning far out. And then there's the short range time of flight, which is basically you pulse a laser out, illuminate the scene, and just look what comes back. A lot of cell phones actually have those in there for 3D recognition of your face. Okay, so there's their. I'm not going to talk about the time of flight on my next slide because I couldn't get it all sorted out. Also, there's the yellow ones, which is ultrasonic. I didn't realize they even use this for parking. I was unaware of this. And then there's the radar. The magenta is for blind spots, and then the black one in the front is there to look out so you don't hit something. Simple. So there's really 39 image sensors or some kind of sensors on the car for just self-driving on the system this is developing. It does beg the question, 10 years from now, let alone 50, what is going to these implementations going to look like? Who knows, right? We're in the fog of self-driving and development right now. So I put this plot together. I was looking at this. This is a table of some of the people who are working on self-driving car systems. Every single one of them has a visible imager in there. Okay. What's interesting, well, first, before I get into that, I do want to make out one point is that fully self-driving supervised is an oxymoron. And that's what that's how they advertise their self-driving system. You can't say that. It's an oxymoron is like we drive on parkways and we park on driveways, but at least people aren't getting killed. But it's like, it's crazy. But it's interesting that in 2023, Tesla dropped their radar and the ultrasonic for parking. All right. I think they're actually right here. There's all this political stuff going on, but it becomes a question. Forget that. Who is right and what the implementation could be. What is interesting is there are people that don't use LiDAR, but there's a whole group that uses the 905 nanometer LiDAR, right? And there's a second group that uses the 1550 nanometer, and that's in the SWIR. I'm going to come back to SWIR at the end. I'm not really going to talk about this much, but I've been looking at what wavelengths will be best in bad weather. Okay, is it MWIR? Is it long wavelength? Should it be radar? And I don't have a lab anymore, but I've been looking at stuff online and reading some papers. I really think 1550-ish to 1700 is really what you want to see through rain, fog. I didn't realize there's different types of fog. And you want to use polarized light for some and non-polarized for others. It's interesting reading these papers. But I think that's where we're going. That's what you want, but I don't think we need LiDAR. I don't think we need the 3D. I'll get to that in a minute. And then there's BYD, who's actually kind of taking over the planet right now in electric cars. I mean, they're dominating the rest of the world in Europe right now. I guess in Israel, I was talking to someone a year ago, like 60% of all the cars in Israel right now are BYD electric. Okay, and they're taking over Europe also, but they're using both the 905 and the 1550. They claim the 1550 is good for long distances and the 900s for short. Who knows? Now, this is just an example of what you get with LiDAR. Just to everybody, you can get a 3D image and you can say things are going on, but I think you're better off with higher resolution. And I just want to make a side comment about the 950. There's tons of websites out there with examples of this. There was a guy that had a camera, and you can see that there's row defects in there. Yeah, and those are shorts. I know that I'm pretty sure that the current outline and the row select lines got shorted. And it was like, what happened? Well, it turns out the last good image or the first bad image he took is when one of these self-driving image cars would drove by. This is the 2019 Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas. So this is a year before COVID. And if this is going on, I don't know what it's doing to our eyes. All right. And I know the 905 nanometer is not supposedly that good for your eyes. And they say it's good, but it's one of these things like, have we really studied this? Supposedly 1550 is not nearly as bad. But I mean, I'm looking at the image sensor in the camera, and you can see it's melting the control lines. So that's something that it bothers me a little bit. This is just a side comment. Okay. About 20 years ago, I hate dating myself here, I actually got in a heated discussion with an image scientist once about depth perception at the time. And I argued, look, you can catch a football with one eye, and birds fly through the forest. They're not doing any peripheral vision. They're basically looking at how fast the trees are coming at them. And that's how they dodge it. You know, what's getting up close, that's what they're doing. And that's the reason that 3D movies never really took off, because it's not the natural way we view the world. Got in a heated discussion about this. All right. You argue about this one way or the other. Take it for what it's worth. But it's worth coming back to this, because in terms of self-driving, do we need depth perception with the LiDAR systems? Do we need to map out with 3D? Or do you need higher resolution images? And that's why I think the visible actually matters. And humans, I mean, we don't give a driver's license to someone unless they have 20/20 vision or glasses, right? And I'm going to come back to that point. So you can see that there's a lot of videos out there on YouTube about the Tesla cars going through a billboard. I mean, any human driving a car would say this is a billboard, even though it looks like a road. So what's going on with the Tesla cars? It's because they're stupid. I mean, they're not paying attention to how fast things are changing. That's all there is to it. All right. But coming back to this, a few months ago, I was talking to my colleague Mark Balin, and he pointed out predators have forward vision for tracking and prey lateral vision for surveillance. I had never thought about this. Okay, it's one of these things. I immediately put this plot together the next day. It's what I do in the morning. So after hearing this, I put it, and he's right, at least for birds and for mammals. For fish, not so much. So the thing is, if we evolved from fish, our ancestors couldn't use two eyes for depth perception because they're on the side of their face. All right. You just can't do it. It's physically impossible. And I've read that the path from our retina to our LGN, the optic nerve, actually does a little bit of a wobble as it goes back. And therefore, it appears that our eyes we evolved from prey, meaning that our eyes used to be on the side of our face evolutionarily. So if that's the case in the distant past, our eyes are on the side of the face. I'm not sure if that last statement's true, though. I was looking for cross sections from the brain to see if that's how our optic nerve actually goes. But it's an interesting comment. All right. However, it's the whole point of this is welcome to the era of engineering cognitive psychology. How did our vision system evolve? What's the best way to implement it? Right. So welcome to a new world.
But you're assuming that the human visual system is the pinnacle.
Exactly. Well, I'm going to get to that in a minute. We're going to get to this because I'm going to go through some other animals too, and I want to do something. But I just want to repeat that it's important. Is a question of should we go to higher resolution, or is it depth perception, or do we need something else when we make the self-driving car? Okay. And also, how do we structure the data coming in and how are decisions made? I get to this. So I was looking for this. I remember reading this a long time ago. The first death in a Tesla self-driving car was in Florida. And supposedly the guy hit a truck that had a white trailer in it, and it was like on the horizon and the clouds are there, and it just couldn't make it out. This was the first death. It's in Florida too. I couldn't find the truck. However, when I was doing the Google search, I found this. Detroit 2021, what did the guy hit? White truck. And then I also found this in Gainesville, Florida in 2022. I don't know what the world the car was doing because this was a rest stop. All those people died, by the way. So it's not funny when you see that. But it makes you realize, welcome to the new world and how we doing it and what the heck's going on there because things aren't getting corrected out. All right. It's interesting that Tesla pulled the radar system out because the radar should have picked that up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, something's not right. All right. All right. Moving on. I've been told you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and you tell them what you told them. I've been studying how the brain's wired up. And this is the flow chart that I think how we should structure how data should come in and flow through the system for doing a self-driving car. It's based on somewhat of the vision system. There's a few things that are different. And there's also some connections in here. I don't know if I can't get my mouse to slow down. But along this line here that I'm not quite sure how to handle all of the data. But I just want to make some comments. We have a blind sight pathway, and I'm going to get to that. And it's effectively for survival. That's why we're scared of snakes. See a snake, you immediately respond to it. You see something coming at you, you immediately respond to it. It does not pass through our visual cortex. It goes straight to our brainstem. A car should have that fast processing superior colloquius. And basically, if a kid rides his bike out in front of you, sofa falls off the back of a truck, you immediately stop, immediately avoid it. Okay. There's also another thing called the navigator pathway. It's associated with grid cells, and it's how we lay things out. It's basically how we position objects. I'm going to get to that in a minute, but some people won the Nobel Prize in 2015 for the discovery of grid cells. So a lot of this stuff's new. They were discovered in 2005. They got the Nobel Prize in 2015. There's the what pathway that was popularized by Milner and somebody else. I'm going to get to that in the 1990s. And there's also the where pathway, which ODA stands for Observe, Orient, Direct, and Act. If you have military training, that's what people do. So those are the three ones, and they actually go through here. I want to spend a lot of time talking about the move processor. If you go to the where pathway, the way that we process data is you can break it up into a semantic part, which is a short movement or a word, and a grammar part, which is like a dance move or a maneuver, or you can think of it as a sentence. And that's the way the human brain works. And it's interesting that our language appears to have evolved from the way that we process movements. I'm going to get to that in a minute because I think it's really interesting. And the other thing is, which is important, I have over the far right, the cerebellum, LLM for large language model. 70 to 80% of our neurons are in our cerebellum. The rest of our cortex and our thing is mainly just wiring for handling how we process all the data. I'm going to get to this because I thought our memories were in our cerebellum, like our long-term memories. They're not. They can't be, and I'll tell you why in a minute because you discover things. And I'm going to put down that humans have at least two other pathways. We have an eye movement pathway for tracking. So our eyes will actually follow stuff. You don't need that for a self-driving car because you're going to just fix the cameras on there. And we also have our circadian rhythms, which flow to our pineal gland, which controls our 24-hour circadian rhythms and also our yearly circadian rhythms for shedding of fur. Unless we go back to riding horses, that's going to be unnecessary. So, all right. So going through this, so I'm just going to go through this quickly. Language is the most powerful form of data compression ever conceived. I never appreciated that until I started looking at this. It evolved from how our brains organize movements. The basal ganglia part is connected to part of our cortex consists of three parts. We identify things, that is how we learn. We're semantic, which is short words or short movements, and grammar, which is sentences and maneuvering. Semantic, I think of as chunks. Grammar is we chunk our chunks. That's how it goes. It's unemotional. It's like a reflex or a habit. You don't think about it. Our limbic parts of the cortex create stories, plans, trips, and is reward driven. Okay, and it's emotional, and it happens for rare events. Okay, if something traumatic happens, we remember. Right, and I believe it evolved from how we found food. By the way, that's the first problem anything had to ever solve: how to find food. The data exchange between these regions in the cerebellum is beautifully organized between this. I'm calling it the basal ganglia cortex and the limbic cortex, our emotional part. And you can think of our cerebellum as a large language model processor. So it's basically an input comes in and an output goes out. I'm going to get to the organization, and I'm going to start talking about the limbic part, which is the story, and the basal ganglia part, which is the grammar and the semantic. I'm going to come back to that. So I'm just telling you what I'm going to get to. And then our basal ganglia unemotional brain regions evolve from our sense of taste, touch, and hearing. Okay, that is it. And our limbic brain regions evolve from our sense of smell. And our sense of smell has come in, it goes to entorhinal cortex, which is Brodmann area 28. It looks like it's never been rewired. Okay, evolutionary, we learned how to smell, it's never been rewired. Everything else has been rewired multiple times in our brain, especially vision. Vision is complicated. There are 5 to 6 pathways in our brain, maybe even more. Vocalization is complicated. There are 4 to 5 pathways of our vocal cords, one for speech and the others for laughter. And that's what I'm going to get to because that's the whole reason I even started doing any of this. Yeah. Mirror neurons allow us to learn by seeing the action, doing the action, and imagining the action. They were discovered in 1992 by Giacomo Giallotti. And the fact that he has not won the Nobel Prize, the fact that I think he's in Italy, because the guys that found grid cells were in Norway. Okay. I think it's a crime against humanity. The guy, this is huge, mirror neurons. Because they allow us to have empathy. And I'm convinced that if you're not a packed animal, you're incapable of expressing empathy. or seeing empathy, and it's because of mirror neurons. And there was a mirror neuron dogs have them, but I believe there was a mirror neuron explosion with primates, and it's part of the reason we can socialize so well. All right. And brainwave frequencies change on depending on how our mirror neuron switches are configured. We have these in our brain. We can imagine actions. We can do actions, like I can pick this up, or I can imagine picking it up, or I can watch you pick it up. And depending on how my mirror neuron switches are fixed, it changes the capacitive loading in the brain. And that's where alpha waves and beta waves and gamma waves, which are like at 10 hertz and 30 hertz and 50 hertz, switches them around. That's all speculation, by the way. Nobody has proven this, but I'm convinced of that. All right. Tell them what you're going to tell them for. It takes about 10 to 25 milliseconds for signals to propagate from brain region to brain region. That's kind of an important point. And we play our imaginations backwards through our brain. That's something I didn't appreciate. Remember I told you that the guys that won the ImageNet took a graphics card and they basically programmed to run the other way? It's an interesting point. The phenomena aphantasia is amazing. Out of curiosity, how many people know what aphantasia is? Have you ever heard the term?
Is that the smell sight senses cross seeing something and thinking it has a smell, for example?
No.
Okay.
This is I did not know about this until about a year ago. And then blind sight is amazing. I'm going to get the blind sight. And then we occasionally discuss self-driving cars and introduce the idea of engineering cognitive psychology. I already did that. But that I'm going to get to the very end. And we'll end with the self-driving car image flow chart, which I showed you. Basically going to justify why I put that up to the rest of this talk. So that's where we're going with this. Okay, and this talk's going to be very high level. No equations. No, we're not going to do color correction matrices. Nothing like that. Okay. All right. So what happened? A few years before COVID, we were thinking about self-driving systems, and I stumbled upon I.M. Sluislov's idea that we laugh to clear our brains of bad inputs. He had 2 papers in 1992. And a lot of people today think we need laughter in AI systems to minimize hallucinations. If you think about it, if you go out on the internet and you collect all this data and you try to train a system, if there's bad data in there, how do you say, ignore this? Right. So the question then becomes, is slapstick funny because it's simply bad input data? Like you would never do this, right? I mean, who in the right mind would let someone put a football in their head and let someone kick it, right? That's why it's funny. There are issues with this theory because we laugh for a lot of reasons, not just that. For example, babies laugh at 4 months. Like, why? You laugh at 6 months if you're tickled. Why? Group laughter at like 3 to 4 years. Sarcasm kicks in at about ages of 12 to 14. Why does that happen?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And then, yeah. And then, old friends laugh when they get together because they're stimulating resonances and memories. We laugh for a lot of reasons. Okay. Then I asked myself the following question. We laugh. How is our voice box wired up to our brain? Never asked that question because I've been spending like 3 hours every morning for the last 6 years figuring this out. All right.
That itself is humorous.
Yeah, it is humorous. I have a 900-page book that's about ready to come out because of this. All right. I've been working on this like crazy. It's I call it The Origin of Humor. And it actually has 3 volumes, but the first volume is 900 pages. So it's huge. Now, it's not as bad as you think because most of it's images or pictures. Okay. And this is one of them. When I was in graduate school, a colleague of mine named Tom Edelman told me, Noam Chomsky's talking over in Sibley Hall. And I go, who the heck's Noam Chomsky? He goes, he's this famous linguist who believes that the reason that monkeys can't speak and humans can is because we have fine control of our motor, our vocal cords, and it's wired up like that. We have a different way of wiring it up, human. Well, I was like, this is interesting. I went to the talk. He didn't talk anything about this, though. He ended up talking about Central America, how the CIA and ABC was a right-wing organization, and then the whole world was in cahoots about. And that's the whole reason things were going down. I was like, relax, dude. After hearing the talk, the sometimes it's not about you, and stuff. And it's funny to think of ABC as a right-wing organization compared to today. It gets back to Friedrich Nietzsche, who believes that wait three generations to five generations, and once politics flips 180 degrees, so be it. However, he was right. In the 1990s, they figured out that we actually do have we have fine control of our vocal cords in a speech region they call our new language motor area. It's located on our left in the primary motor area of our brain. That's Brodmann area 4 down there. Laughing is mainly, it has several places, but there is a old laughing motor area that's in our secondary motor area up top here, about here in our brain. And it actually goes slower down to our vocal cords and out. And it also connects to our hypothalamus, when we laugh, we actually release neurotransmitters and hormones. Therefore, laughter is a more honest form of expression than language, because language we're just controlling, we have fine control of our motor cords. There's other regions that will come in our brain that get to when we laugh also. So this isn't the only one. But Chomsky was right. They believe it's our FOXP2 gene. I told our youngest son, if we took a FOXP2 gene and we spliced it into a chimp's DNA, they should be able to talk. And he goes, that is an unethical experiment, but we have to do it. That was his comment. Who knows? But I went through, and I have Darwin actually thought a lot about laughter, and he was about halfway there actually. His last book is about how behaviors evolved. He talks about laughter in like one chapter. But our basal ganglia system, I'm just going to point it out, goes all the way back to, my opinion, the sea startle reflex that are in fish. You touch it on a fish on its side, it'll form a C and swim away from you. So I think tickling's an echo going all the way back to that. And our basal ganglia system evolved from that. Our limbic system evolved from solving the food problem, which is we all have to do. And like when we see food, we go, aha. It goes back to laughter in that. And then there's 11 other stages that go along, and sarcasm comes in. And I'm convinced you can't have sarcasm unless your civilization gets at least above 10,000 people in a city, because it has to do with social interactions. If you live in a small village, you're not going to be sarcastic. So there's interesting things that come about this. And the latest one is like nothingness. You say, this is just ridiculous. And it's interesting to see just from anthropological observations that a lot of our behaviors kind of map these stages of evolutionary development. They're not one-to-one. Okay. Going from our first laugh to tickling to jealousy, to imagination, shame, group laughter, teasing, gossip, sarcasm. Humans more combative in our teens and 20s. And then we kind of start to mellow out in our 50s and 60s. So it's a one-to-one mapping. Okay. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I actually went through the brain and I couldn't figure out how to read some of these medical papers. So I just started renaming all of our brain regions by function. Nobody else has done this that I'm aware of. Somebody should have, but I don't know of it. But it allowed me to sort of sort through what in the world's going on. All right. Now, these are not hard and fast, by the way, but at least you can start making sense of what's going on. And what's interesting is our sensations which is our visual cortex in the back, and our touch and hearing, which is 41 and 43, or up here, is much larger than our response out, which I thought was interesting. All right. Our response out doesn't take up that much of the brain. And did I just do? Oh, yes. And there's something called the Wernicke area, which is where we identify both sounds and language. And it's back near the visual cortex, but it's also close to the hearing. And that's our language comprehension and our reading, which I'm going to return to. And there's also the Broca area, which is like a secondary motor, and that's where speech out goes. And just for reference, our motor out is about here for our vocal cords. So it's right next to it. That's an important point. All right. And oh yeah, I have it right here. So there's the speech out. I just want to point that out to you. It's right next to it. All right. We have what I call our movement planning area, which is Brodmann area 7. And that's where words and chunks are. And it's actually in our parietal cortex, but it's near our visual cortex and where we identify things coming up, what we're going to call the what pathway. And that's the movement planning. And we also have our creative strategizing, which is our frontal lower part. And that's where we chunk our chunks. And it's interesting how far apart they are. All right. They're not right next to each other. And that's where we do our sentences and our dance moves. And so this is my phone number when I grew up, 1-316-943-4702. I'm never going to forget that. But it consists of 3 chunks, chunk, chunk, chunk. All right. And a sentence is chunk of our chunks. All right. So that's going on. But then how do we put sentences together to make stories? Well, we do that. Well, before I get to that, we haven't identified what pathway that comes through the bottom. And that corresponds to what I call our face identify, our second object identify, and first object identify. It flows through here. This is where color, faces, and shapes are recognized. But what's interesting is that feeds into something, the vibe stamp, which is our emotional meaning area. And that's a higher level thing, but it grew out of our emotions, and it grew out like where our sense of smell is, because you can just see that it's just wired right over there. And vibe stamping are things like, okay, Godfather and Goodfellas are like a similar movie, or I can look in here like everyone in here is a human. There isn't like a fox that's like angry. There's a rabbit. That would be a different vibe stamp. And if you go and you use Bing's current AI image generator and you generate an image, it will actually show you like 100 other images that are very, very similar. So they actually have these vectors now that are like a dot product of 100 different properties, like elephant or who knows, like animal type, blue sky, multiple people, like it's just a vector, and they go and they say, okay, what other images have a similar vector? And they look at the dot product and they say, which one's the biggest dot product? And they go, show them those images. So that's a vibe stamp. Okay. And we have it within our brain. That's our emotional meaning area. And we also have our frontal cortex, our advanced planning area, which is our frontal cortex up high. And that's basically where we put our stories together. I call it our advanced planning, right? And it turns out this is more limbic compared to basal ganglia. Because these two regions are actually tightly tied together, as I'm going to get to. And one thing I realized, our emotions are reward driven, and they're very rational. I never realized this, but our emotions are very, very, very rational. They make sense. It's people who are irrational that we say are emotional. And it's almost the wrong way to think of it. We all go to work to get paid. If we weren't getting paid, we wouldn't go to work. So our emotions are rational. All right. I have in my book, I did a flow chart of how every region of the brain is tied together. And this is a zoomed in version. It's an eye chart. All right. It's just insane. But I want to point something out to you. Unlike our other senses, smell has never been rewired. It goes straight to our Brodmann area 28, to the entorhinal cortex. I call it our event memory fund. Right? Taste, touch, and hearing, they go straight to the thalamus. They don't go to any of the emotional parts, what I'm calling emotional parts of the brain. And they've been rewired a few times. All right. Now, what's interesting, it's pretty clear that our ability to navigate in grid cells evolved from our sense of smell. These were discovered in 2005, and I said that the Nobel Prize was won in 2015 for them. If they looked at mice, and if you put a probe on a given cell in there and have them run around, they find out that we actually take a room and we break it up as a hexagonal grid. So we basically do this, and different neurons have different grid spacings. So, and this is how we can tell where things are. Like, I know where Rich is sitting. I know where everyone else is sitting. We place them in there. We have a place field cell, so when we want to run around in a room too, it'll light up when I get to here, but it won't light up in other places. This is how we can walk across the room at night and flip on the light switch. We have memorized how to get across the room, and it's all in this region right here. And we also have border field cells that tell us we got walls here. Right. Now, what's really interesting is we know if we're claustrophobic, our amygdala, or I call it our emotional dispatch center, lights up like a thing. And it's coupled strongly to our event memory funnel, or region 28. And what happens is if you get in a small room, are all your grid cells and place cells and border cells going to start firing? They all start firing, and that's why people freak out. All right. And that's also why people like to live or go and look at a mountain view, because when you look out, your grid cells spread out and nothing fires. So that's why vistas are very calming and tight spaces aren't. Welcome to the world of engineering cognitive psychology. Never dawned on me until I started looking at this. What's going on here? Vision is complicated because it's both limbic and basal ganglia. And I want to point out our what pathway actually couples into the event memory funnel and our emotional regions, which goes to our vibe stamp. And that pathway is the what pathway is how we recognize emotions and faces, babies. You know, if you see a baby and you think it's cute, it's going down that pathway. And we also have a navigator pathway that flows in and just basically locates where objects are. Okay, so we have multiple ones in there. All right, I want to take a step back and talk about something else, aphantasia. This was first described by Francis Galton in 1880, but remained relatively unstudied. People forgot about it. Basically, most people can imagine an apple as being red. I can just visualize it in my head. I can even say it's on a pedestal, it's spinning around, now morphs into a banana, morphs into a cute little purple dragon, morphs into a scary black dragon, now flies through a wall. Visualize it in my head. 10% of the population can't do that, right? Which I thought was kind of weird. There are 2% of the population that have severe aphantasia. The only reason this became popularized was there was a paper in 2015 by a neurologist named Adam Zeman over at the University of Exeter. In 2005, which was 10 years earlier, there was a patient that approached him, and he seemed to have lost the ability to visualize stuff after undergoing, they call it minor surgery, but it had something to do with his heart. So I don't know how that was minor. But after studying him for a while, he coined the term aphantasia. It's based on some Greek words. And it's basically that you can't visualize stuff. All right. Now, what's interesting is people have started studying this more, and there's a Joel person in Australia. And I thought this is crazy. If you imagine a bright light, your pupil will shrink. Never realized this before. So we are playing our imagination backwards through our brain all the way to our eye. Very important point. And he has studied this, and he has found that people with aphantasia, that doesn't happen. So it's not something that's psychosomatic. It is actually real. Very, very cool. All right. And it's telling us we replay our imaginations all the way through. Now, back to this. This Giacomo Rizzolatti discovered mirror neurons. And basically what it is, if a monkey would grab a banana, a certain neuron would fire. But his team in 1992 found out also if I grab a banana and he sees it, the neuron will also fire. All right. And what's really important here is if you watch a baby, people have studied babies and they're learning how to do things. They will spend 40% of their time looking at their hands, like when they're like 4 or 5 months old, doing this. They are effectively learning how to open and close their hand. So it's like we have mirror neurons. We're learning how to do stuff, and we're feeding it back. I thought that's really cool. I don't know. But it also begs the question, if the monkey imagines the action, no one ever said this, does that neuron fire? I'm convinced it will. I don't know how to do the experiment. I get, cause I have to go get a monkey and try to do these things, figure out which neuron it is. There's also some questions. I believe that most mirror neurons are von economo. And what's interesting about those are for sending signals long distances. Whales have lots of them. And we had a von economo explosion with primates. So, like 20 million years ago. However, I've read that there's also the pyramidal neurons in layer 4 of the cortex are mirror neurons. So this is still kind of a gray area. I don't know how this is all going to get sorted out. The takeaway is we play our imagination backwards through our brain. And I did see this quote the other day, so I just threw it in here. Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. That was Albert Einstein. So now, side comment. Imagination is more important than just that. This just kind of popped up recently in the news, so I thought I'd throw it. There was a Waymo taxi that drove through a standoff between a gunman and the LAPD. All right. We silly humans can use our imagination to figure out driving through a standoff is not a good idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does Waymo have an imagination? No.
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah. So you have to imagine, like what's going to happen before you do it. I'm going to drive through the standoff. I might get shot. I thought that was crazy. Also, we can use our imagination to figure out it's not a good idea to drive behind this truck.
Is that a variation or a different way of saying their limitation is in handling less common situations?
That is a limitation. I don't know if it's the biggest limitation, but it's a limitation.
Yeah.
Humans can handle very weird common. If you see some kids playing near in a yard, I'm going to slow down.
Right. Oh, yeah.
For obvious reasons, but they're not going to slow down.
Although I think also in my experience, my ability to handle an uncommon situation tends to degrade when it gets weirder and weirder.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, yeah. It's at some point you pull over and just take a nap.
But that's another way of dealing with it. It's like I can't figure out what's going on, so I'm just going to pause for a minute to figure out. So anyway,
human. Yeah, go ahead.
On that Waymo example, I remember seeing the video, and didn't the car follow a car that did the same thing with a human driver, and didn't it see the police cars that were straight onto it as like a roadblock? And so it said, okay, I can't go there, so I'm going to do this, and followed another car that did the same thing.
I can't speak to that. I only saw the video of the Waymo car going through.
Yeah.
So I can't speak to what you just said. So yeah, well, it's interesting.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
I just thought the media tried to put more blame on the Waymo than it should have.
Okay, well, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Back to this. This is kind of crazy, but I was watching YouTube, looking at YouTube, and there was a 2009 60 Minutes episode, and it was from these guys, two researchers at Carnegie Mellon, Marcel Just and Tom Michel, and they were comparing our brain's response to how we respond to different words. And they threw up on the screen gossip and spirituality. And it was right when I was looking at the same time about how our brain is wired up to our voice box. And this is the exact same spot. Where's my mouse? Right here. Come on. Yeah, right there. That hooks up to our vocal cords. The talking part maps to where we send signals to our vocal cords. We think of gossip as talking, right? And I was like, look, that's going to there. So we're playing our imagination or how we do things back in our brain. Totally freaked me out. I was like, this is kind of crazy. So I'm going to come back to that point in a minute. All right. First off, before moving on, I want to discuss language and how we organize our verbal thoughts. Broca, around 1860, started doing some autopsies on patients with speaking difficulties. There was a famous guy that he was degrading, and at some point he would just say the word tan, and so they just called him Tan. And when they did an autopsy on him, they found out that there was Brodmann area 4445 there were lesions there. And he found a few other patients that had the similar problem. They all had lesions at the same place. And that became known as Broca's area. So that's kind of where the voice out goes. It goes through there. I consider that our second motor area that goes to our primary when we speak. And then 20 years later, Wernicke, who was German, looked at a bunch of patients and he found out they had difficulties understanding inputs. In the Wernicke area, they found that there were lesions in abdomen areas 39 and 40, which is in the back. And that's kind of where we identify words to use those, right? But then it becomes a question, what happens between the Wernicke area and the bronch area? This was kind of like the standard model 20, 30 years ago. But I mean, how do we plan what we're going to say? All right. And what happened is there were some scientists at UC Berkeley, led by Jack Gallant, and he first published the Brain Dictionary Semantic Atlas in 2016. So this is relatively new. And then what they ended up doing is they put people in a functional MRI and they read them stories, and they looked at when you said a certain word, what part of your brain lit up. And they were surprised that we used almost our entire brain to interpret language. And this gets back to all those functions that are the functional areas. If you go and you look in there, what I put in for functional areas actually kind of correspond to some of these words. Like our face region, a lot of the things that we hear with faces show up there. Like parts of, so you can kind of map around. It's not all perfectly one-to-one, all right? So if you drive around locations of most of the words correspond to the brain region function. It's not completely one-to-one mapping, but it's interesting, right? Now, as I'll get to, laughter shows up where that laughter region is up here. If you go in, the word laughter is up there. All right. Now, this is where things get really interesting. There are certain words like murder or kill that light up most of the brain. All right. And nobody talks about this because that was the first thing. I went into this dictionary and I started driving around. I go, what's going on? And I look like, why is the word murder everywhere? There's certain words, and this explains why people like these murder mysteries on TV. You know, it's something that it's just instinctive. Like we want to live. Somebody says murder, the whole brain lights up. Now, this isn't part of the dictionary, but the other thing that's interesting is if a female hears baby laughter, her brain completely lights up. Doesn't happen with males. All right. There's been studies that have shown this. So it's similar. There's certain words and certain sounds where your whole brain lights up, right? Evolutionarily. The brain dictionary hotspots are identifying and planning regions, and these regions also all map to the cerebellum. Okay, so that's there. And as you can see, if you look at the top right, I'm using the laughter up where our laughter output is located. All right, but I want to talk about these other regions. And you can go to the Brain Dictionary at Berkeley, and you can go in there and drive around and see what words are. I actually spent a week trying to write a Python script where I could type in a word and it would show me exactly where it was located, but I couldn't get the darn thing inverted, so I gave up on it after a while. So I manually have looked at a lot of words because it was just easier doing it that way. All right, this took me a few months to put together. I had to read a lot of articles. But if you are 70 to 80% of our neurons are in our cerebellum. And so I asked myself, okay, how is our cerebellum wired up to our cortex? There was this connectome project that was done from about 2011 to 2020, where they basically studied lots of people and how things were wired up. You know, a lot of review articles out there. So you can take your cerebellum and you can unfold it. Now, one thing that I need to point out is there's about 10 to 20,000 of these things called microzones inside our cerebellum, and they're about that big. And you think of those as large language models. They have an input and they have an output. They don't have multiple connections to them. It's like data in, data out, right? Signal in. So we have about 10 to 20,000 of these large language models in our brain, in our cerebellum. They're laid out like that. If you unfold the brain like this is how the primary connectivity to the rest of the brain is. Now, it's interesting. A lot of the movement what I would call the semantic takes over a lot of the brain in the lower half of it, right? And our creative planning 10 takes over a lot of it also in a similar region. Now, this is second order connectivity and third order connectivity as I was able to read it from all the review articles I was looking at, right? How things are mapped out. There's a few things that's interesting. If you look here, yeah, stuttering maps to this area here. That's the Broca area. That's the cerebellum that's connected functionally to our Broca area. Now, this will go through our thalamus and then up there. So our thalamus is kind of like our grand central region in the center of the brain that kind of handles all the wiring. And it's worth pointing out, I forgot to go through, if you look at the top there, you see where the damaged cerebellum, typically if I ask you to go touch this, my finger, nose or something, you can just do it. People that have certain regions damaged in their cerebellum have what's called ataxia. And they have to go like this because they have to do all these little minor calculations to get from point A to point B. Our cerebellum, being the large language model, basically smooths everything out. People who have issues or lesions in this region of the cerebellum stutter because they can no longer talk smoothly, right? People who have lesions in the Wernicke area of the cerebellum basically just start saying word salads like Dracula, window, run, where is it, whatever. They don't make any sense. It's because they can't put thoughts together, right? However, there's a better way to view this. I looked at this thing about 15 times, and then it dawned on me, boom, this is how we should look at this. The cerebellum can be thought of as an identified group. The green is what I said, that's the Wernicke area and our face area and where we identify stuff. Right? And I also include our emotional meaning area. That's where you vibe stamp stuff as meaning. There's a planning group, which is mainly our creative planning and also our semantic area. And then there's a response group. Now, what's interesting is the response out takes up almost no region area of the cerebellum. And that's our secondary and primary cortex. I'm including our Broca area as a response out. Okay. I don't want to get into all the details. I don't want to get bogged down in all this. All right. We have a basal ganglia cortex. We have identify. We have semantics, which is words of short movements. And we have grammar of maneuvers or dance moves. And they all map to the same area. So all those regions basically communicate in the cerebellum. You have a large language model, and then they send data back out to those regions. Okay. And surprisingly, like I said, the motor area is very small. Most ataxia has nothing to do with the response, even though we have problems. It's basically has to do with how we plan stuff. All right. We also have a limbic cortex mapping, and other researchers have been calling this their limbic cerebellum. And there's a talking hotspot. That hotspot, let me back up one. That talking hotspot, I mean, there's a lot of activity there where we talk. However, we do now know that the basal ganglia cortex has like little twinkles in it. Okay. So basically the limbic is telling the story, but then when it needs to go say a word or put a sentence together, it sends out like a little, that's why you don't see a lot of activity, because it's kind of being spread out over the whole brain. It's only the limbic area that's really hot when we talk. Now, what's interesting about that is the Wernicke area maps to that talking spot. And the Broca area, we also have the vibe stamping, our emotional region maps to it. Our advanced planning maps to that limbic area. And our Broca area also maps to it. So this is basically our limbic area is how we tell stories, go on. And it's interesting, the Wernicke area and the Broca area also map to that. Okay. Now it's worth noting too that when we laugh, our laughter spot is basically over here in the response region. It's near where the talking is. So the talking evolved out of it, but they're not in the same place. All right. Much time. Oh, I'm at 7 o'clock. All right. I'm going to go really quickly here. There is a woman in 2014 was admitted to a hospital in China complaining of dizziness. She has no cerebellum. I thought you couldn't live without your cerebellum because I thought that was what your memory is. She didn't talk until she was 6. Her speech is slurred and harsh. She did not walk until she was 7. Her walking has been wobbly. It's mainly she has like ataxia. She walks like a robot. Remarkably, she's married and has an old. I don't know what to say because this totally blew me away, and I have like a gazillion questions I want to ask her. But let me skip that when you talk about this over dinner. Moving on to our vision system, I'm going to go fast, quickly. I asked Google Gemini 2 image generator, please give us a picture summary of all the key neural networks for the human vision system. It gave me this. I don't know why our optic nerve and things go outside of our brain, but it does have our what pathway and our how pathway in there. I gave it a fail.
Yeah.
I asked Google Gemini 3 this weekend. It's much better, but it doesn't have our where pathway or what pathway or navigator pathway. It's basically just how the signals come in and get to our visual cortex. So it's getting a little better. Quickly, we have about 10 million rods in our brain, retina, and they have a linear response, and they saturate if you go outside. Okay? Yeah.
You said 10, but I see 100.
Sorry, 100 million.
Thanks.
I misspoke. We have our cones. There's about 7 million of those. Most of them are in our fovea in the center. Color vision. It's interesting. We only have about 1 million axons that come out of the retina to our brain or goes to our LGN. There's an incredible amount of data signal averaging and data compression that happen on the retina before the data sent back. I like to think of our eye as 2 cameras. One's low light, saturates when you go outside, and the other's color. Okay, and there's serious data compression. I'm going to skip this. This is just, you can get the book. It talks about rods. Some animals have no rods. Some have 2 rods. You got specialized receptors for the Arctic tern. And basically that's for being able to figure out if there's polarization or edge detection. And there's some animals that have 2 phobia, some with none. Okay. Humans have 1. All right. I'm going to skip this one because this is basically just the different pathways coming back. There's 4 of them. One thing I do want to point out is if you look at the LGN, there are 6 neuron layers in it. It stands for bent knee. It's in our thalamus. 80% of our neurons go there. 4 of the layers go to the cones and 2 go to the rods. I'm pretty sure we're doing either color correction matrices or edge detection there. Mm-hmm. And there's a Bob Troutman I worked with, and he told me he wrote a paper in the 80s that basically humans see color in CMY space. I believe him, actually. And I did want to, I was looking for this. I'm trying to find a good SEM of a cat or a dog because they only have 2 color vision. And I want to know how many layers they have and if there's 4 layers for cone or just 2 or a different number. I don't know the answer. That's something. And whether it's CMY, I believe it's CMY. So I completely believe him, and it has to do. Well, let's skip it because we're running out of time here. There's the 2-stream hypothesis that was pushed by Billner and Goodale. It's consistent with the mapping I've been talking about. And I'm just going to leave it like that. Nobody seems to talk about this one, but this is our navigator pathway. It goes to this navigator region to our event memory funnel, and that's where the grid cells are, which I already talked about. So I'm just repeating myself. They were discovered in 2005 by Edvard Moser and May Britt Moser and their students in Norway, and they got the Nobel Prize in 2014. Like I said, I don't know why Giacomo Giolotti didn't win the Nobel Prize for the discovery of mirror neurons before this, but that's a separate thing. But nobody really talks about this pathway. I don't know why, but it's there. You can see it. I have this whole chapter about how the vision system's wired up, and I went and looked at my notes, and this has to exist. I'm going to skip this. I'm just going to make one quick comment. In 2006, we were driving home. My wife was with our 3 kids after going with the Strong Museum with our children. And I'm driving down on Blossom. Some guy fell asleep. swerved hard into our lane. I have never reacted so fast in my life because I slammed on the brakes, swerved hard to the right, and yelled out a curse word at the same time. He was in a GMC Yukon. It's a big car. We avoided a head-on collision. He hit the side of the car. We managed to keep going forward. I still remember sliding sideways across the road. Both tires on the passenger side collapsed under the car when we hit the curb. Went over a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit sign. Stopped about a foot in front of the support concrete post to the 590 because the Blossom goes under the 590. It's interesting that it was a traumatic experience and my brain kicked in a bunch of neurons and hormones, so I still remember it in vivid detail. All right. But I want to talk about blind sight. There's a guy in World War in 1915, 1920 during World War II who noticed that if some World War I soldiers that had damage to their visual cortex that were blind, if you held a flashlight up to them and moved it around, their eyes would track it. Really freaked them out. Okay. And Larry Weisskranz popularized the idea of blind sight in the 1970s. He had several patients. He could put objects in the hallway that were blind and they could walk down the hallway and avoid the objects. Very freaky. All right. I don't want to spend too much time because we're running out of time. I'm convinced we use our blind sight pathway all the time. We just don't realize it. Baseball players have less than 250 milliseconds window to hit a baseball. There is no way that signal is going all the way back to the visual cortex and back up to the top. We're short-circuiting that when we use it. If you want to build a self-driving car to avoid accidents like I just described, you have to have something that can respond like that. Survival mode. That's all I want to say. I'm going to skip the rest of this because we're running out of time. I do want to mention there was a Jessica McFadden in Australia. She's now in England at one of the colleges there. She took all the human connectome project data and determined how we extract emotions from other faces. Follows two pathways. This is the best pathway. Comes back. There's one that goes slow, goes all the way to our visual cortex, and it comes back up through our temporal lobe, our face identify, and goes to our amygdala, or should I call our emotional dispatch center. But there's another one that also goes to our superior colloquius, our pulvinar, and then comes back up to our amygdala. One's our fast fear pathway for survival. The other one is for looking for details like in a baby. And I believe our fast fear includes our fear of snakes. We're scared of that stuff. I'm going to skip this. Basically, I think this is how we want to build the camera for a self-driving car. It should have viz telephoto, viz wide, SWIR. That's to be debated. The SWIR is for bad weather, to see through snow, rain, and such. I'm still not 100% sure it's the best way to do it. I don't think we need 3D because we don't use 3D when we drive. I mean, people with one eye can drive, so be it. For side view, you don't need the telephoto on the sides of the car, and you should have one redundant camera in every position. You don't need as many as Sony said. And I'm going to just say this is the end. I came up with this by studying the brain, figuring this out. All right. Apologize for going 10 minutes over. So
You're
You're in the window.
in the window, okay.
I don't think we've ever had anyone finish early.
That's like a challenge now.
Remember it happened in the last 10 years, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah,
Questions?
too much to absorb.
Still processing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Related to.
Because John, you talk a lot about how this should be based on the human visual system, and then you said, but is that the best system? Like, you're kind of making an assumption that.
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to that.
My thought on that is I don't think it is because as we evolved, is that a right berry? Is that not a right berry? Is that going to kill me or is that not going to kill me? I mean, we developed a set of skills and our brains evolved that way. How many of those are a parallel task to driving a car? I mean, we still want to survive, right? But the kind of things we want to identify in a scene are different. I guess they have in common. We can predict a moving object when it's going to intersect our trajectory. That's important.
Yeah, although I guess to me, one of the and I'm just thinking out loud here because based on what you've shown here, there's oh, I would describe it as there's a whole lot of reuse of areas in the brain for multiple purposes. I think you said the vision system and the language systems overlap with the spatial processing systems.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah.
So in that case, maybe the thing is for a car, the ability to tell berries apart is pretty irrelevant, but some aspects of this organization still show up anyway.
I want to make two comments. I want to answer your question, but I want to make a comment about what you said
Please.
first. The thing about my son saying that we splice a FOXP2 gene into a chimp and they should be able to talk, I think their vocabulary would be very limited. Humans have about a factor 2 larger cerebellum compared to chimps. I believe that factor 2 increase has to do with language. Chimps will have a hard time processing sounds because they have not evolved the next level that we have. Don't know the answer to that, but I'm pretty sure that. Back to you. I don't know what the best way. It'll be interesting to see what the best way is. There's no one way to make a self-driving car system. That's probably the way to say it. However, as time goes on, we're going to figure out what are the key ingredients for doing a self-driving car system. And that chart that I showed you at the beginning of all the different companies using different technologies, those are going to get weeded out. But the thing that is not getting weeded out right now, at least we don't know, is how they're doing this, how they're processing the data.
Mm-hmm.
And the question then becomes, in the end, we're going to be able to process the data. Do we want to be able to have the top cars talk to each other? Or do you want to be able to do it independently? I think we're better off going independently because what happens is you start getting too much overhead if you have somebody controlling it. This will be interesting because it's going to be very political on whether we want to have our car system be able to, like the air traffic controllers and such. Are they going to be talking to each other, or are they going to be independent like they currently are?
Air traffic controllers is different because I one of my other friends talks about swarms of drones.
Oh yeah.
And there's a whole lot of peer-to-peer communication. So that's not necessarily centralized control, but there is a lot of inter-drone communication. So communication isn't the same as centralized.
Yes. Well, then, yes. I'm going to agree. It gets complicated in a hurry, though.
Yeah.
It gets complicated. Yeah. One thing, taking a step back, I did work a little bit with the IVAS system, which was the helmets that go on soldiers, and you put them in the field, and they basically look out, and then all that data comes back and gets processed. The people who were making all the money on it, though, were Microsoft and the people controlling the data. The hard people doing the hardware weren't making that much money. I thought that was really interesting when all was said and done. The people that sit on the top, it's where all the money is when all this happens. So
the other question about in terms of comparing the human visual system versus what you want a self-driving car to do is that, as you well know, the human visual system processes things in a particular order in terms of motion is the first thing that we see. And then after that, shape and then color in terms of the ability, for example, to find food, to watch out for predators.
yeah.
We don't care what color our predator is if it's coming at us. So, in terms of how the car figures out where to go, what's moving in front of it, and then the shape will help me the car figure out, what space do I have to get around the other car that I'm about to collide with? And then at the very bottom, the self-driving car can decide, I don't care for the color that the other manufacturer painted on that car. That's irrelevant. So,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Back to your fast processing. My wife got T-boned this summer. She was fine, but the hit was square on the pillar. The car didn't spin or anything like that. we were driving today and a car, there was a good distance, car pulled out. And I said, if that were closer, would you aim for a square hit or would you try and swerve with the risk of spinning the other vehicle? And we both came to the same conclusion. You can't think that fast. It just, it's instinctive.
I think you can. Let me just throw this out here.
Yeah.
Anyone who's ever fallen on a bicycle or fallen in real time, it's amazing how you plan your trajectory. I'm going to roll on this side. I'm going to land on this side. I'm going to absorb it this way. I was running one time through a construction zone, didn't belong there, and I tripped on a pile of rocks, and I fell down. And the rocks were they're big rocks. They were big as a doghouse kind of rocks. And I managed to fall, land, get back up, and run through, pretending like it never happened. And it wasn't until I thought back and like, how did I do that, and what did I do?
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on.
How old were you?
I was in my 30s.
Okay.
I wasn't like 9.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
it happened, and when you replayed it, you said, "What? That was a good way to do it." But
I would not have planned. I would not known of how to plan that ahead of time. Although, and maybe because it's your own body you're very familiar with, and you have a lot of feedback and things going on, and like you said, there are pathways which are directly wired. A car being less integral to the human body, I guess if you, after years and years of driving, maybe you have that same sense of it being an extension of your body, and maybe you could do the same thing. I don't know, it'd be interesting.
Imagine, right? Yeah, it might be very different with training with, race car drivers.
Yeah,
Different reflexes than.
but the study of that was right up there with the monkey gene, I think, in terms of being ethically.
Yeah.
There's also, you were talking about, if a human or a monkey reaches out for a banana, or they see somebody else doing that, they can imagine that. I've experienced similar kinds of things listening to music, and if I hear an instrument that I have played before, I can feel that in my fingers and my feet. Just the whole kind of movement kind of that would it take to make that sound.
Yeah, and like dancers, I'm sure if they hear music, they immediately want to just start dancing what they've learned, right? Same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you flip back and forth. That would probably be the best experiment to do in terms of brain waves. Is basically have someone listen to music and imagine the dancing, and then actually dance to see if the brain waves actually flip, because then your mirror neuron switches are turning on and off different parts of the body, something like that. Got to make an MRI machine you can stick on it as a helmet and then go around and do stuff.
Yes. And I'm one of those people that drive with one eye. And so I know what you're talking about in terms of, depth perception, and that when you don't have stereoscopic vision, you're utilizing the other depth cues.
Exactly.
What's in front, what's in back, what's the size, tells you a little bit about the distance and all of that. And it's a new skill that you learn if you've lost that piece of vision.
Yeah, from automatic driving, it's a very cheap way to get a depth map, right? So I agree. You don't need both, right? You can create a camera model, and you're moving through space, and you can make estimates on the fact that in fact, basically the fact of moving through space is like having a stereo camera, right?
Exactly.
Instead of being separated laterally, they're separated in
time,
the movement direction.
Yeah, it's temporally versus angularly.
Yeah, I mean, my assumption is that some of the proliferation of input devices has to do with limitations of technology. And they're saying, okay, we want this whole system to work, so we're going to solve the problem with bits of specialized hardware. And as you develop more processing, you don't need as many bits of hardware. But anyway,
I just want to make one last comment. I'm convinced 10 years from now, definitely 20 years from now, the large language models and the ASICs that we have are going to use an orders of magnitude less energy to process all this data. That's coming. That's very, very clear. That's coming.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, man. You're going to see them.